Welcome to Biachad Together, spirited by American Jewish University. I'm Catherine Schneider, VP of Advancement, and I am delighted to be joined by Larry Platt, a leadership guru and expert and board member of AJU. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about how this afternoon is going to work. Larry and I will chat for about 25 minutes or so. And then we will open it up for Q&A. We do want your questions. At any time, you can put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. For those of you who are new to American Jewish University, we are a warm and welcoming, open community where the learning never stops, and we are delighted that you're here. Let me tell you a little bit about Larry. He is a businessman, lawyer, and healthcare leadership and governance expert. He is on the Cedars-Sinai Board of Directors and has served as the chairman of the board. He has extensive experience in strategic planning, finance, nominating and governance, medical policy, and overall improvement. He chaired a campaign that raised $357 million for Cedars. He is a senior partner at Strategy Advantage, a boutique consulting firm. And as I mentioned, he's a member of our board here at AJU and the chair of the development committee. Larry, thank you so much for joining us today. We are delighted that you're here. Our topic today is how do we lead in this moment? And we're going to try to cover as much as we can, but I want to start with, we face crisis moments as leaders, board members certainly have, the recession, 9/11. How is this crisis moment different from others that we've faced?
Well, it's totally unprecedented. We're all in organizations. We've all had to deal with economic changes, but this one is different in that post-World War II, every crisis we've had to face economically was induced by economic factors. This was induced by a medical event, and the medical event snowballed into an economic crisis. And unlike other times where we could predict coming out of it, because they were economic factors and we had economic models to rely on, this one is a medical solution. So until we find the medical solution, the economic negative consequences will continue.
Okay. So, part of adaptive leadership is the event happens, you're in crisis mode, and then following the crisis, which has an end, you suddenly are in leadership mode or change mode. And we're at a time where we're in crisis mode and change mode at the same time, which is, I think, a way that many of us are learning how to lead in this time. And given that, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what's the role of board members, and then what's the role of staff members? And for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to use the word management. Some people say professional staff, but I'm just going to say management. So what's the role of board leadership? What's the role of management?
Well, I think the rules of the road in this area stay the same. And what does that mean? The board is responsible for governance and oversight, and management is responsible for operations. Those are two distinct responsibilities, and the board has a responsibility to make sure that they do not get into the lane of the management, which again goes into operations. So management needs to really present a plan of how it intends to navigate the organization during the crisis. It's solely responsible again for the operations. The board's role is to work with management in formulating the organization's strategic posture during the crisis and in the post-crisis world. And then again, once the board signs off on management's plan, the board needs just to get out of the way and let management execute.
So let's talk about that, because in times like these, boards will give executives more financial power to make decisions that normally would have to come back to the board, maybe some operational leeway to quickly act in response to changing situations related to loans, related to other issues. What kind of resolutions should the board be thinking about to allow their management, allow their executives to make the decisions they need to be making?
So a best practice that has emerged, and most boards should have already dealt with this, but if they haven't, they should deal with it now. And that is, they should pass the necessary resolutions that allow management to perhaps exceed budgetary prerequisites so that they can deal with emerging crises. So again, the board needs to unfetter management so that management could react quickly. And those are the type of resolutions that the board should be passing. Because if the management has to call the board in order to do something, that will get in the way of management moving on its plans. So that would be dangerous.
So kind of related to how decisions are made. I mean, if you watch the news, we're all trying to wrap our head around what's happening, what are the trends, can high holidays happen? Can they not happen? Are we going to be able to have a gathering? Are we not going to be able to have a gathering? Who should the board and management be in conversation with? What types of professionals that can help them understand what's happening and understand the decisions that they should be making and the liability they may or may not be facing?
Every organization is part of a group of organizations that should be and those professional organizations should be opining on what strategies management should be taking. Management has responsibility to get ahead of this, to see what's happening in the ecosystem of their industry, and informing the board as to what is taking place among the industry. Management really has to keep the board informed as to the strategies that other organizations are taking and what their organizations need to pursue in order to emerge as a leader in their area. Board members need to take the responsibility to stay informed. I mean, they will get the information from management, and management should be informing the board, but board members need to be reading, and there's a lot of information in every type of industry as to what's happening, what other organizations are doing, and board members have a personal responsibility to keep informed.
So, one question, and this has to do, many organizations, their fiscal year is going to start July 1, others are on a calendar year. So some people are preparing budgets or readjusting their forecasts. How many budgets does an organization need to prepare right now? And what are they responding to? What are the scenarios that they should anticipate needing to respond to?
Yeah, so a best practice is when it comes to economic models and forecasts, what management, along with the board, should be doing is to assess, then reassess, and then repeat that continuously until we get to what the new normal is. So all economic assumptions will need to be updated as the pandemic takes its course. Based on my experience, which was really in the 2008 recession, I would say that management and the board should focus really on 5 steps. First, you should have a clear view of the organization's financial position pre-COVID. Where was your organization? Next, assess the current situation and use it to develop a range of scenarios. The third step is to align on the most realistic scenario financially, not the one you hope for, but the one you realistically think is going to be the financial situation your organization is going to face. Once you have the plan, management has to execute. But the board needs to, with management, identify trigger points that will prompt your organization to adjust and adapt the forecast model and financial plans based on certain happenings.
So
So those 5 areas should be activated.
can you give me an example of what a trigger point might be?
If the, so many, so let's say you assume you're gonna have in your business revenue of X from whatever source. And you need this revenue model, forecast and model to fund Y in your organization. And it is not happening.
Right.
At some point, you need to go in and reassess it.
Right.
That you're not going to have this revenue stream. And what does that mean for your
Right.
operation?
So an example, I guess, for folks who are listening, you're assuming you're going to sell high holiday seats, but high holidays may not happen, right?
Right.
Or you're assuming that you're going to be able to start seeing clients in person in September, but actually it's November, right? So those would be the kind of trigger points. You know, you said something that in a private conversation that I thought was really fantastic, that the board is on one hand supposed to get out of the way of management and not get in the weeds of the day-to-day operation, but they should be providing the opportunity for sober second thought. So kind of what is sober second thought and how does a board do this?
So in a crisis, human nature is you make rapid decisions and you may not be thinking of long-term consequences. What the board should be doing when management is making certain decisions is to step back and think, what's the long-term consequence of that decision? How's that going to affect the organization? How's it going to affect its reputation, its relationship with employees, with its customer? So again, the board's responsibility here is to, with management, step back and assess. Because one direction, a direction you may be going, may have important consequences that are helpful now, but long-term may be very hurtful to the organization.
Can you give us an example of some questions that you've asked in the past that can help kind of trigger this sober second thought? What are questions that you like to ask when you're in meetings?
Yeah, so I mean, the first and probably the most important question that the board should be asking management right now is the steps management has taken to protect its employees, the safety of its employees, its visitors and customers. And customers is, you know, congregants to a synagogue, students to a university, patients at a hospital. So what are the steps taken, and are those steps adequate, and how will they be factored into a post-COVID world where we may be in a situation where we're coming out of the situation of being sheltered at home, but we don't have a vaccine? The board should be, again, continuing to monitor the financial sustainability of the organization and should be asking management to do an assessment covering various risks that management may not be thinking of, such as what are the technological risks? At the university, we're moving to a web-based portal for education. Is that at risk? What's the situation? What are the situations management should be looking at? There are regulatory and legal issues that will be affecting every organization. How is management addressing those? Again, the obvious cash flow issues, internal controls, human capital. Does management have the right people to deal with this situation? So all of those type of things need to be, again, you need to step back and look at it.
Right. And I think along those lines, and this is part of a conversation we had earlier, supply chain risks. At the beginning of this, you couldn't get hand sanitizers, right?
Right.
So you're going to open and you're going to require everyone to have a mask, and then you can't get a mask, right? So that could impact, and then also internal communication, communicating to your stakeholders and communicating to the press in some cases. Who's handling that, and how is that being handled?
That all goes into the human capital analysis.
So, once the organization finds its, I don't know if it's a new normal, it's temporary normal, but this is how we're operating for now. What questions should the board be asking about lessons learned and the path forward?
Well, there are probably 3 areas that a board should be focused on as we start moving towards the new normal. And that is, engaging with management and a real assessment on lessons learned. The board should be requiring management to assess what went right, what went wrong, and how to better prepare the organization for the next crisis, because there will be another black swan event. The board should confirm the effective health strategies, whether the protocols worked and what protocols really need to be put in place on an ongoing basis. And management should be conducting a risk assessment as we transition to the new normal. Now that's in the lessons learned area. The next step is to keep a long-term focus by reviewing the operational model. So what do I mean? The key question the board should be focused on is answering this question: how will my industry and ecosystem be reshaped by this crisis? And what strategies should my organization pursue to emerge as a leader? Answering that question will guide their organization's strategic response. I would add that David Hollis came out with an admonition that I think everyone should take to heart. What he said was, and I'm quoting him, "In the rush to return to normal, use this time to consider which parts of normal are worth rushing back to." That should be a mantra for management and every board. And finally, the board really has the responsibility to reassess the organization's purpose and value proposition. Our world has changed. The current crisis is changed every business model. Getting ahead of the fundamental changes affecting your industry, your organization, getting ahead of that serves in helping you to become a leader and not lagging behind in your industry, in your area. So it's important to assess what the value proposition of your organization is in the post-COVID world. And the board should also closely monitor how competitors are evolving and what they are investing in to help opine on what you should be doing.
Great. So I want to drill down on that. Just a reminder to folks, in just a few minutes, we're going to switch to your questions. We already have some questions in our Q&A box, but please type your questions in there now. Don't hesitate. So I want to talk a little bit about philanthropy for the next few minutes. You clearly have some real expertise in that. And I think, many organizations felt, at least for the first month or so, that if you weren't in healthcare directly, that, maybe we shouldn't be asking right now. Maybe that's insensitive. And I think that we've come out of that and that we're asking more. But the model that many of us were trained in is that the ask always happens in person, and that it happens maybe in someone's home, and you need to build rapport, and you have to really create a connection, and then you get up to your ask. And Zoom is a very different platform, and it takes a lot more emotional energy. What does philanthropy look like right now? How does it happen?
Yeah, great question. So this is what I know based on my experience. In the second, so Cedars-Sinai launched the $350 million campaign in 2007, which I was chairing, and we were doing great. And then 2008 hit. So we were faced with, as we are today, a major unforeseen event that loomed as if it could actually derail what we were trying to accomplish. Instead of saying that we need to stop, we said we need to pause, reassess, and then move forward. And I think the same is happening right now. The initial reaction of most organizations was they wanted to be considerate. We're in an economic uncharted territory right now. So how could you go out and ask donors for money? My experience leads me to believe that it's okay for an organization to go out and ask for donations. What I would recommend doing is take it on a 3-step process. One, stewardship. Through using the phone, call your donors, the people who are close into you, just to say hello, how are you doing? Board members could do this, development staff people could do this, people in management could do this. So the first step that everyone should be doing right now is reaching out to their donors just to see how they're doing, making that connection. Next, every organization should be looking at how they are making a case that their organization is worthy of continued financial support. That means being able to say to a donor, there is a compelling and urgent reason why your valuable dollars should be spent on our organization. And once you've put together that case as to why your organization is opposed to another organization, then re-engaged with your donors. And that again could be by phone calls. Once you establish a phone call, if you want to set up a meeting on Zoom or any other web platform to have those discussions. But the pause was correct when we first went in this COVID situation. No organization could continue without raising money. Donors get that, and the emphasis now needs to be on moving and going ahead and raising money.
Terrific. So I think we're going to talk even more about that because we have some questions coming in. So before we go to Q&A, just for those who have joined a little late, my name's Catherine Schneider. I'm Vice President of Advancement. This is Biachad Together, spirited by American Jewish University. We are talking with Larry Platt, who is a leadership consultant, a board member, a businessman, a lawyer. And we're now going to move to questions. And one question, and I think it's an excellent one, from Bradley is he writes that our synagogue's management is our 2 rabbis, one who is relatively recent, and an office manager. So does this change what the board should expect from management? If so, and how does this affect the board's roles and responsibilities?
The answer is yes. You've got a situation where you have a management team that is small. Rabbis aren't necessarily good business people.
Although some are, and
some are, but
rabbis might be terrific. Okay.
But but you know, when it comes to running a hospital, I mean, doctors are terrific, but they're not necessarily the best business people. And that's where the board, in that situation, the board could really come in with the personal expertise that board members have in business to help the management, being the rabbis, steer the organization. The rabbis have the vision. In this case, the rabbis know what they need to do to be relevant to the congregation, but there are business issues that the rabbis may not be aware of in risk management, looking to make sure that the financial situation is totally covered. So that's where the board could be not take over operations, but help management ask the questions to make sure that they are covering everything they need to cover in operations.
So thank you. And that we had a related question, clarify the term management, perhaps it's the executive committee of the board. And I'll say I am a board member on our congregation, and it's a smaller congregation, and it's a very similar structure where we're putting together a committee that has an attorney, has input from a infectious disease doctor and others to try to anticipate some of the liability health issues. So I think I think probably, and Larry, feel free to disagree with me, really having a very clear understanding of what everyone's job is and how it works, because I think, you know, it becomes inefficient if a board member moves in a direction and the executive director moves in a different direction, and suddenly time has to be spent resolving lack of alignment versus spending that time and figuring out how to assist congregants who want to build community in a very scary time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. And again, the board should partner with management, advise, help, but as far as getting involved in operations, they need to stay out of that.
Right.
And that's whether you have two rabbis and a director, and that's your management staff. If they are the right people for those positions, then let them do what they need to do in the way of operations. The board can advise, the board needs to monitor, right, and ask questions of management and give advice where necessary and step in where there are holes, but leave it to the management for operations.
I think, you know, one of the things that I like to say is that the biggest liability in any situation is what you don't know, because the liability that you've anticipated, you can prepare for. And so the board can help ask the question, what don't we know here?
Exactly.
And I think, you know, in many situations, there's a board book for everything and there's a consultant for everything, but no one has quite ever faced this situation before. And we're all learning together. And so just asking as many questions as possible is one of the most helpful roles a board can play to begin to imagine what's possible. And I've used the word liabilities, but I think also opportunities. Avi asks if the recorded version of this Zoom meeting be emailed to all attendees. Let's see if we can figure that out. I will. We have a really wonderful Biachad team who has put this together, and if that's a possible thing, we will certainly do it. There's a question, the role of the board in shaping fundraising. So why don't we take a step back and say, what's the role of the board in fundraising when things are more normal? And is the role of the board different now related to fundraising, and if so, how?
So I'm assuming this question that every organization has a professional on staff who's in charge of fundraising. So
why don't we, a professional on staff or a working board member, a very involved working board member? For sometimes smaller organizations, there's a lay leader who's as if they're a development.
Okay.
Okay.
So the same thing in general governance takes place here, in that there needs to be a strategic plan of how you're going to raise money. Now that we're in this COVID situation, board members should be sitting down with whoever's in charge of fundraising at the organization and saying, all right, how are we going forward? We can't sit back and say we're not going to raise money. So how are we going to now raise money? When it comes to philanthropy, board members have a fiduciary responsibility to do the following. A, give themselves, because you can't ask for money unless you've given money. So they need to step up. B, open doors to people who are close, who are potentially close in, aren't necessarily donors, but if the board member opens up the door to that donor, then the professional fundraisers, along with that board member, could solicit a new donation. And also in formulating any policies that need to be activated, the board should be engaged in. So the board, and when it comes to philanthropy, the board has a real responsibility to work with the professional or the board member who is in charge to help it happen. It's not going to happen without board support and board engagement.
So I think that is very important. And what I would add to that, and I've thought about this a lot because fundraising is my job, advancement's my job here at AJU. And what has occurred to me is that if you have not been directly impacted by COVID in a health way, and please, everyone should be healthy, but if you've not been directly impacted, the most important thing to you is community and culture. If you see what the lifeline is to people and what people are watching, I know synagogues have record attendance on Zoom. That people, so you may say, well, my organization isn't a food bank, and therefore maybe I feel shy about fundraising and it's not as vital. I would argue that your organization and the day-to-day lives of most people is more vital than it's ever been. And finding a way to articulate that and practicing that with your board members, because what will happen as a professional, people might not tell me how they feel, but they might tell a board member, and you can start to hear, if people say, well, I don't really want to give to you, and here's why, you can start understanding that and figuring out how to respond to that. Because I think that for a lot of people, whether it's a synagogue and going on the daily meditation or a virtual art tour or whatever it is, that really has become a way people are getting through what's happening right now. One question that has come in.
Let me just add something to that, Catherine. So again, I said that every organization has to have a urgent and a compelling reason why someone should donate to that organization. One thing that is true of almost every Jewish organization is that we've got a threat to the Jewish community of Jews not being connected. They're not, and as this process of COVID goes forward, what Jewish organizations are going to be at risk of not emerging on the other side? And every time we lose a Jewish organization, we're potentially losing the ability to connect to Jews, to make sure that we have people who understand what it is to be Jewish, want to connect with other Jews, remain within the Jewish community. So there's an urgent need for donors to help synagogues and other organizations, Jewish universities, so that we are on the other side of this to connect with Jews so we have a community going forward.
So I think what we're saying is all of you are vital and you're doing very important work, and you shouldn't feel shy. There's another question, changing gears, which is how often should board and management meet? The question is, we normally meet once a month. Should they be meeting more frequently because times are so fluid?
So that's a cultural question for every organization to answer. And the thing that board members have to be respectful of is that in putting together a board meeting or any subset of the board, the audit committee, the finance committee, development committee, whatever it is, it takes a lot of management time to put those meetings on. So just to have meetings where management is taking time and resources from where they should be spending that on operations may be very counterproductive. So the answer to the question is, as these meetings should take place only as necessary. So if you have set board meetings once a month, and that's enough for the board to feel comfortable that they are overseeing the management's handling of operations and are comfortable with that, then leave it once a month. If management feels that they need to communicate more with the board, then management will make that decision. But having these meetings takes time, and again, you don't want to distract management from what they need to be doing.
Great. So thank you. One possibility is to have a call with executive board members of the executive board, or key lay leaders on a more regular basis, but that doesn't require the agenda and the minutes and the,
Well, one thing management should be doing is if the board meets once a month, what management should do is send out they could do an email update and do that on a bi-weekly basis. That does not take a lot of time. It keeps the board informed.
Great.
So there's ways of communicating that doesn't take a lot of management's time, but will keep the board informed, which the board should. Transparency and flow of information is critical in these times.
Great. Okay, I have a question from Marcy. I'm concerned about going forward with sisterhood organizations and Women's League of Conservative Judaism in person after we get the go-ahead to resume life as we know it, as we're dealing with a high-risk population. So if you have organizations that's pulling folks together that are either older or immunocompromised, even if the governor says you can meet, what do you think?
Careful. Again, we're in chartered territories. We're learning things about COVID today that we didn't know 3 weeks ago. The virus is changing. I would move very slowly and look to alternatives such as doing Zoom meetings opposed to face-to-face until we get to a situation where we have the herd immunity because of a vaccine, or we have therapeutics that deal with this. But no organization wants to do anything that puts their members at risk.
So, and this is a related question, and I'm not sure you have the answer, but we can riff on it. This is from Stephen. Looking out a year from now, if there are no major advances in place in terms of either that vaccine or the therapeutic treatment, can you speculate on what major changes going forward we would look at for synagogues?
I mean, it's true of any business, is that how are you going to engage with your customer base, in this case, your congregants, and protect their health? So, what that's going to look like, I don't know. But, that's what I was speaking about before, about looking about what this new world is going to look like and how you lead in it. So doing nothing is not the answer. Looking how you adapt your organization so that you remain relevant to your congregants becomes an imperative. And how that looks, I can't tell you. But it's incumbent upon you to look at different ways of doing business.
So I think that's something, and I think AJU, definitely within our rabbinical school and our school of nonprofit management, and also in our school of education, are starting to ask these questions and think about what's the role that we can be playing in the community around these questions, because, you know, there's no model for how to move forward. It's
Yeah,
an
there's-
excellent question.
yeah, and there's another factor too that everyone has to consider, and that is whatever you do has to resonate with your congregants or your community. So if you say, all right, we're going to have a meeting and we're going to have it in such and such a place, but the people you're inviting aren't comfortable in coming to that event because of their safety, it's not going to be a successful event. So the model you come up with not only has to further your objectives, but it has to also be one that your audience is comfortable with.
Sure.
And that may take some education. I mean, I can tell you on the medical side, what we're facing is getting people who need to have elective procedures, which 3 months ago or 2 months ago were totally discretionary, but now have become more critical, getting them to feel comfortable enough to come to the hospital or the doctor's office, not worry about COVID, and get the procedure done. So it's a two-way street. You have to do what, in order, you have to make the smart moves on the organizational part, but they have to resonate with your congregants.
I think that is a great point. So I'm gonna just, you know, there's a similar question that came in around bar bat mitzvahs. I think, Judy, we're gonna have to get back to you on that because I don't think we know yet. But it's an excellent question. I have a high school senior, you know, so all of these milestones, what does it look like? I think that there's a practical question, and then I think there's a little bit of heartbreak that we have to just support each other as we move through this. I didn't put Leah up to this, but she asked if you published anything on the subject. And before we started, I said, Larry, you really should publish what you've written. So we can work on that together. Getting back to Avi, I got a message from our Biachad team that said, yes, this is going to be available on YouTube. You know, that I'm happy to know that. You know, we're not going to be able to get to every question, so I think we're going to wrap up. I do want to let you know, if you're watching, this summer, our School of Nonprofit Management is going to offer one of our classes online and open to the community, and it is about how you manage and also related to legal issues in general, but especially in this time. So if you know, I think that could be very helpful for all of us to participate in, and so keep your eyes peeled for that. I also just want to put in a plug for Biachad. This was a very specialized session, but we offer everything from Tinder to Torah study. So please stay tuned. I would encourage you to take advantage of what we have. I want to really thank Larry for your leadership, for your time, not just your leadership at AJU, but your leadership at Cedars. You are part of the team that's keeping our city safe. And we really, really appreciate all of that. If any of you had a question that just didn't get answered or you didn't feel comfortable, you can email me. I'm catherine.schneider@aju.edu. You can also find me on the AJU website, and I will get your question to Larry. So again, I'd like to thank you all for participating. I'd like to thank Larry. This has been Biachad Together, spirited by AJU, and stay safe, everyone. I hope I get to see you face to face in the not too distant future. Have a wonderful day.